Hello everyone, my name is Nick, and I've been on a year-long adventure to improve my skills in our beloved game known as RuneScape. From starting simple and only being able to kill Vorkath, to moving on to soloing TOA, COX, and finally achieving my first Infernal Cape, I want to showcase 3 incredibly useful skills that I've learned over the years that made a massive impact on how I play the game. I do want to note though, this is by far from a complete list, and what we're going to talk about is going to start out really simple, but there are plenty of other tips out there that you can learn to improve your gaming experience. These 3 skills are by far some of the most important skills that I had to learn though, so I feel like they're worth noting. If you want me to expand on this list, let me know in the comments below. With that said, let's jump into number 1, prayer flicking. Ladies and gentlemen, I can confidently say that almost nothing in this game is restricted by your skill in prayer flicking. But if you don't know how to do it, then the game is going to beat you into submission until you learn it by flooding you with a ton of damage. The fight caves in the Inferno are great examples of this logic in action. It is possible to do both challenges without knowing how to prayer flick very well, but you're going to take a ton of damage throughout your runs thanks to only being able to block one type of damage. At the same time, you're going to lose a lot more prayer points than you really need to throughout those runs because you're constantly camping a prayer. This logic goes for all kinds of bosses and general Slayer grinds, so let's fix this. The 2 types of prayer flicking that I'm going to be discussing here is lazy flicking and one-tick flicking. Lazy flicking is what I would say most people need to know to some degree in order to advance into higher PvM challenges, while one-tick flicking is incredibly useful, it's not as impactful. Let me explain. Lazy flicking is the idea of turning on and off your prayers only when you need to. A fine example of this is when you're doing Slayer. Once you know the timing of your enemy, you can flick on the protection prayer when you get hit and flick it off when you don't. The idea for this protection prayer also works for boosting options. Flick on Piety when you're swinging at a monster, but keep it off when you're not. Doing this protects you from damage, increases your DPS, and saves you a ton of prayer points. This type of prayer flicking is incredibly useful and rather easy to learn. The next Slayer task that you get assigned, just play around with that idea. Regardless if it's ranged, mage, or melee, you can find a time where you can flick on and off your prayers and save you from taking damage. If you're flicking on protections, the general idea is to have the prayer on right before the monster starts their animation. For example, as soon as this ranger starts to bend down, that's when the damage is calculated, so I need to have my prayer up right before he starts the animation. There are some exceptions to this whole keep your prayer on at the start of the animation rule. Jad is a great example of this, where his damage is calculated when the projectile is visible and not when the animation starts, but the overwhelming majority of PvM challenges, you're going to have a safe bet and say as long as your prayer is on right when the animation starts, you're going to be safe. So go out there and start experimenting. On the flip side, one-tick flicking looks like this. You can use the prayer orb right by the minimap and be able to flick on multiple prayers at the same time without losing your prayer points. I personally have this little line going through my orb, which helps me see tick rates. To turn this on, go over to your RuneLite settings, search up prayer, and turn on prayer flick location to prayer orb. Just so you can match all my other settings, here's that full page. Once you get that set up, you can move over to your prayer orb, set your quick prayers to whatever you want them to be, and be ready to start clicking. I'm going to slow this down a little bit just so you can see the whole thought process. When I'm ready, I click on the prayer orb, so I click it once to turn on my prayers, and then the bar starts back over. Once that happens, I quickly double click before the bar passes completely over the orb and starts up a new tick. So the bar starts, I click the orb twice, turning off my prayers and then back on again for a split second, and then wait until the bar starts back over again. At full speed, it looks like this. Once you get it down, this is one-tick flicking, and it's incredibly helpful when fighting monsters that only have one attack style, and also increases your DPS since you can use enhancing prayers while protecting yourself. Both of these prayer flicking options are incredibly helpful and rather easy to learn and practice, all things considered. Next time you're at a safer boss or doing Slayer or even just running around the game, you can practice flicking your prayers and eventually it'll come down to muscle memory. However, when I talk about experience, I would highly recommend learning lazy flicking first before moving over to one-tick. I tried my best to just skip lazy flicking and go right into one-tick first, and I quickly realized that lazy flicking is way more useful than one-ticking. Places like the DKs or anywhere else you have multiple different types of enemies fighting you, it's a lot better to know how to lazy flick all of them instead of just protecting against one type of damage. Moving on to the second most important skill that I learned way too late in my gaming adventure is inventory management in switches. Now this one's rather subjective, but it's incredibly important. For years, I would be the guy that camped the boss, and my inventory would look different every time I left the bank. Some of my specs would be at the top, sometimes my gear would be at the bottom, everything was just crazy every time I left. This issue of constantly changing my inventory around really blew up in my face when it was time to take on raids, where multiple gear switches are kinda needed to do the whole raiding thing. Now, how you set up your inventory is completely up to you, but I have some pretty important tips that helped me out a lot. First up, and this is mainly important if you have multiple gear switches, make sure you have even switches. By that, I mean if you're using the crystal set with the BOFA, make sure you have a matching helm, chest, and legs for all of your other gear sets. And of course, don't forget your weapon. This idea goes for boot switches, necks, rings, and pretty much everything else that you can think of. This sounds like a no-brainer to most people, but it's something that I had to learn the hard way when learning TOA. I would camp the same helm for mage and melee, but I'd bring in a helm swat just for the range, and then I would bring in a neck switch for I think my melee gear, and overall it was just a mess of random gear. While the idea is there to bring in gear that you can swap into to make that particular attack style better, it's a whole lot easier and a whole lot safer to bring in only swaps that you match for all of your sets. Now, this isn't a hard set rule. Some players are able to pull off wild switches at the same time, but for the general player like myself, keeping track of what I have on, what I need to put on, and where it went in my inventory because I'm constantly swapping in and out of uneven gear sets, there's a lot going on for my little brain to handle. Second tip is to practice your gear switch. No, you don't have to be a god and one tick your entire set every time you want to swap, but you want to get to a point where you can comfortably swap between your gears without missing a crucial part. Missing a key component to your crystal set drastically decreases its efficiency, so make sure you practice your switches from time to time. And also, find a way to swap that works best for you. Everyone has their own preferred way to swap between their gear sets. Mine just happens to look like this. My mage and rage sets are swapped from left to right, up and down like this, so when I switch, I do this. Some players may prefer this method, or they do something like this. Whatever works for you. At the end of the day, it's all about what feels right for you, but make sure you can nail down these switches, because nothing sucks more than trying to swap to range and you run up to a boss with a melee weapon when you need to keep your distance. The last skill I want to talk about that really helped improve my overall experience in this game is to constantly try new things. It's a skill that I don't feel like gets enough credit, and yes, trying new things is a skill. So often I find myself sticking to basics or my comfort zones. It's probably why I've been doing COX for the last month on repeat, and it's definitely why I did nothing but TOA for a month straight, grinding from knowing nothing about the raid to doing 350s without dying. Once I got used to it, I never wanted to leave because it's my new comfort zone. Your skills and your experiences vary so much to what I've done and what I personally like to do, but regarding those skills you learned at TOA or COX, you may find out that the skills you learn there are not transferable like you think. Take my journey, for example. I started this channel the week I was able to buy the crystal set and the BOFA. What's the first thing that I did? I went to Vorkath, something that I've already done for hours on end at that point. But it was my comfort zone. I never went back to the gauntlet because I got spooned for the enhanced weapon seed, and I was struggling hardcore to consistently get the Hunlet fight down because I sucked at pathing, prayers, eating, the whole works. But by deciding to take on a new challenge like TOA, I was developing the skills revolving around failure, learning how to adjust my current skills with the new and harder challenges, and how to research each room to understand everything that I need to do and how to do it right. I can't tell you how many hours it took for me to learn the Red X method at Baba, because in my head I was copying exactly what you see here. In reality, I was constantly a tick behind, and I got smacked around because of it. So I had to learn how ticks worked. It took me a few dozen hours to nail down the butterfly method at Akka, because I didn't understand movement and how pathing worked. After I nailed it down, I tried my luck at the Inferno, and got my butt handed to me over and over again. Why? Because I sucked at pathing in this new environment, and I didn't understand ticks well enough to lazy flick the monsters that I need to. If I needed to make the melee dance around in a circle like I do at Akka, I could probably do that because I nailed down that movement a month ago at TOA. But pathing in the Inferno is drastically different because you're doing a new challenge. You have to know about corner trapping, which monsters to take out first, how line of sight works so you can hide and you don't get slapped around, and the list goes on and on. Without attempting these different challenges, I wouldn't know what I'm missing out on or how much I lacked in a certain skill. But after learning TOA, I got better at my switches and my gear setups, something that's incredibly helpful at a ton of other places. Practicing lazy flicking and one-tick flicking while doing Slayer helped me learn how to do the Inferno. Doing 1,000 kills at the Whisper of all places taught me how to L-walk, swap between prayers effectively, move and attack at the same time, all the things that are incredibly important at a place like DK's, a place that I never went to, and a place that you can learn all the skills that I just mentioned a lot earlier than I did before. Because I never did DKs early on in my account, I never learned these skills early until I wanted to take on a lot harder challenges, and I got punished for it. I think you kind of get the idea now. Learn more and keep improving and trying new things. It's a skill of breaking out of your comfort zone, learning what you need to improve on and how to improve it. Sure, you can be like me and stick to the comfort zones and max out your combat, but you'll eventually turn around like I did and see that there was so much content that I missed out on for no reasons and my skills are lacking because of it. Explore new things and try them out. I promise it's going to be worth it in the long run. And don't give up, because if a dumbass like me can do it, I promise you can do it too. With that said, boys, it's time for me to say goodbye. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed, don't forget to like and subscribe, as it really does mean the world to me. Until we see each other again, I hope you're having a fantastic day. Good luck on your grinds and your personal goals, and I hope to see you again very soon. Stay inspired.